All right, I think that we are now streaming. Hey, everybody on Facebook. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Ideas on Tap program. My name is Caroline Gillespie with the Mississippi Humanities Council. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you for being here. Ideas on Tap is the Mississippi Humanities Council's monthly happy hour discussion program that focuses on important, relevant issues in a casual setting. So we normally, before COVID, would be doing these in a bar or a restaurant, and we hope that you are now watching what is our very last virtual Ideas on Tap, and that we can be back in a bar or a restaurant near you very soon. But in the meantime, Zoom and Facebook will have to do, so thank you all for joining us. But through these Ideas on Tap programs, we really try to stress the importance of civil discourse and how to interact with each other in a respectful way, despite any differences of opinions, especially around somewhat challenging or polarizing conversations. So speaking of that, tonight's program is the second in a two-part series that we've been doing that explores the role that government plays in our lives, how that role has developed or changed over time, and how people feel about government involvement. So last month, we started the series with a program that looked at healthcare access in the United States, and tonight we are tackling those same questions by looking at our country's social safety net. So we have a great group of panelists here who will be sharing their thoughts. Sarah Stripp is a program manager at Springboard to Opportunities and oversees their Magnolia Mothers Trust, which we'll be discussing tonight. Brandon Jones serves as Mississippi Policy Director for Southern Poverty Law Center and the SPLC Action Fund. And unfortunately, our third panelist was caught traveling in this bad weather, and we just found out a few minutes ago that he's going to be unable to join us. But Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, was planning on rounding out this panel, and we hope to bring him back for a future conversation to continue this on. And Dr. Temika Simmons, an MHC board member and director of the Local Government Leadership Institute at Delta State University, is kind enough to moderate this panel for us tonight. So we're glad to have all of our panelists and moderator. Thank you all for participating and sharing your thoughts. However, I will say that none of the thoughts or opinions expressed by our panelists tonight are necessarily those of the MHC. So thank you again to everyone who's viewing on Facebook. Please feel free to leave questions or comments in the chat, and we will get to them throughout the conversation and at the end. And if you haven't already, please like our page on Facebook so you can stay up to date on what we've got going on. We hope to see a lot of you in person for our next Ideas on Tap later this year. Be on the lookout for information about that. And I am going to pass it over to Temika, but thank you again for participating and for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to our panelists. I'm gonna give you guys a chance to talk a little bit more about you specifically and the work of your organization. But just as a reminder to our listeners, our topic tonight is too much or not enough, bootstraps versus bailouts. And to just revisit again what Caroline shared initially, this is the first of a two-part series on the changing role of government and how people perceive government by looking at specific areas like healthcare and direct financial support. And tonight we'll focus on direct financial support and the general idea of government bailouts. For example, a lot of people disagree with the traditional idea of big government and direct payments to its citizens through UBI initiatives, but millions of Americans benefited from government's direct payments during COVID. So how do people perceive government aid, and how do our perceptions change when the support does or doesn't directly benefit us? Again, joining us tonight is Ms. Sarah Stripp from Springboard to Opportunities and Brandon Jones from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I'm going to allow Sarah first to talk a little bit about herself. Tell us a little bit more about your organization, and then Brandon, you jump in after and tell us a little bit about yourself and the same in your organization, the work that you do.
Great. Thank you so much, Temika. Well, as said, my name is Sarah Stripp. I am the program manager with Springboard to Opportunities. So Springboard is a nonprofit that is headquartered here in Jackson, though we provide services in Mississippi, Alabama, and Maryland. We work with families who live in federally subsidized housing and provide services to help them reach their goals. Everything that we do, we say, is radically resident driven. So it comes directly from our residents themselves and from their voices. And they're really the designers and initiators and evaluators of all the programs that we have. And one of those programs that came through conversations that we had with them over the years was the Magnolia Mothers Trust, which is our guaranteed income initiative. It is right now the largest guaranteed income initiative in the country and one of the longest running programs in recent history, and the first one to take a really specific gender and racial equity lens. So the program gives $1,000 a month to 100 moms for 12 months who live in federally subsidized housing.
Thank you. Brandon?
Yeah, hey, Temika, it's good to be with you and Sarah tonight and have this discussion. I do work for the Southern Poverty Law Center and our C4, the SPLC Action Fund. I'm originally from Mississippi, down on the Gulf Coast, Pascagoula. And the SPLC, I'm lucky to work with attorneys and organizers and subject matter experts that work in the areas of hate and extremism, education and children's rights, immigrant justice, LGBTQ rights, economic justice. We have lawyers that work on criminal justice reform here in Mississippi. And, here very recently, we've been involved in voting rights, including bringing cases against the state that had to do with access to the polls during the pandemic. And so we work on a broad variety of issues across the South. Of course, Mississippi is not our home office, and we're based out of Alabama. But this issue tonight is something that hits close to home for us, and it crosses virtually every practice group that I just mentioned when we talk about economics in the South and how governments handle these big questions. So excited to be a part of the conversation. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks so much. So let's kind of get straight into the conversation. And for those of you who are watching us online on Facebook, just drop in the chat, where are you watching from across the state or out of the state, and let us know, who's in the room. And so, Sarah, I want to start with you. Okay, I've got a question about some of the work that you do at Springboard to Opportunities. So I really want you to explain for us what benefit the Magnolia Mothers Trust Initiative provides and to its participants, but then also to the broader community.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, the Magnolia Mothers Trust is our guaranteed income initiative. So, at a very, very basic level, the benefit it's providing to participants is $1,000 a month, right? Like that direct cash payment. But even more so than that, I think at the very heart of this program is that it provides trust and dignity in a way that we don't think a lot of other government subsidy programs have, and a lot of other welfare programs have in the past. By giving folks cash as opposed to giving them a voucher that they're forced to spend on something specific, we're telling our families, like, we trust you. We know that you know what's best for your family. We know that you know what you need to thrive and survive. And because of that, here is this money that you can choose to spend however you want, right? Like, no one asks me on Friday what I do with my paycheck. No one needs to ask families who make less than I do what they're doing with their paycheck or what they're doing with their income. We all know how to make those best decisions for ourselves, including people who live in poverty. And so at the very basic level of this program, it is about trust. It is about restoring that humanity and that dignity to people. And we've also seen just the ways that it provides a really basic lifeline over this past year, right? During COVID, as families lost work, as families were trying to figure out virtual schooling and trying to navigate all of these things as families were able to make choices for themselves and for their kids that made the most sense for them, whether that was working a more flexible job or cutting back hours so they would be able to be there for their kids. And also just providing kind of a lot of breathing room for people for the first time to be able to think about what they wanted to do, to think about work in a different way, to think about what might give them meaning in their lives. So, I mean, I think there's just so many ways in which we have watched this program provide just kind of some basic humanity back to people in a way that they hadn't been able to experience in a really long time. When you're kind of like going through these systems and constantly having to prove that like you're deserving or that you're good enough to get whatever subsidy or whatever thing is coming out. So I think that is really like at its heart, like what it provides to our participants and what we're hoping to help see. But to the broader community, I think there's so many benefits too, right? Like one of the biggest things that we see when we do evaluation for this program is that for the moms who are receiving the subsidy, like it's essentially like replacing borrowing in their budgeting strategy, right? So like when we started the program last year, and this was even before COVID had hit and shut everything down, like 27% of moms said that they could pay their bills without any help or support. Which is an incredibly low number and absolutely insane, like when we're thinking about that. And so to make ends meet, like they had to borrow from family members, or they used emergency lending or other like predatory businesses that would come in. And so instead of having to do that, right, they had this money themselves to be able to go spend in the community to contribute to the economy, whether that was buying food or being able to afford the technology that they needed for doing virtual schooling in their home. They were able to get bank accounts for themselves. And then we also are pretty intentional in this program to make it a 2-gen program. So we also set up 529 accounts with the state for all of the kids of the participants. So, they're starting to contribute towards their kids' savings, being able to invest in being parents. I think that's another huge piece of this program, and something that we've all been talking about over this last year too, is like, where are we showing up for caregivers, right? And the people who are taking care of kids every day, or taking care of adult family members, or other people like that. So many of these moms are single moms, right? Taking care of kids, or sometimes taking care of like elderly parents or other people who have been sick or something like that. And I think this program in a lot of ways says like, hey, that's really valuable work, and that's really valuable things that people should be getting paid for, and should be seen as something worth compensating. And so in some ways too, right, like this is compensation for that, for showing that we want to invest in kids and we want to invest in the next generation. And we know that that's good for society and the broader community. And here is an opportunity to do that.
And a lot of what I hear you say are issues around dignity and what that means and what that looks like in terms of the types of support that you make available for families, and how you quantify that in a way of describing. Well, talk to me a little bit about how you quantify maybe the dignity piece, or however you talk about the evaluation. I'm really curious about some of those stories, again, like you're sharing, of some of the families who've been impacted and in some of the most meaningful ways. So can you share again, maybe what you think is one of the most profound ways in which you feel the program has had impact on families?
Yeah. So just for the record, for anyone who wants to know, like our full evaluation reports are on our website. So I definitely encourage you to go and look at those if you want to. But really like the biggest things, especially in this past year, the cohort that went over the same time as pretty much the pandemic, like the first payments came kind of the weekend right before Mississippi shut down. What we saw was people being able to meet their basic needs, to be able to prioritize their health, and to really be able to make decisions for their families that worked for them. So, it was being able to pay bills. We saw a huge increase in families who reported being able to provide enough food for their families. Families who had savings went from 40% to 88%, which was another huge jump. We saw a big increase in moms who were able to get health insurance, which was a really important piece. I think that connects back to the conversation that was had earlier around healthcare and government. So many of our families have not had access to the healthcare system in a long time. And in the midst of a pandemic, that was incredibly important. We saw an increase in folks getting life insurance to be able to start prioritizing for their kids and making sure that there was something for them. A lot of pieces around transportation with families being able to afford cars or just being able to have gas in their car. Again, we talk about how these programs, or a lot of times there's an argument against guaranteed income, right? That it'll discourage people from going to work. I mean, one of the biggest deterrents that we have heard from our families about work again and again is that they can't fix their car, they don't have reliable transportation, or they can't put gas in their car to get to work. What we saw was people being able to get to those places, right? To be able to do that. And then to be able to have choices too, right? Like when you have gas in your car, you're not relying on somebody else to take you to the grocery store or to have to shop at the corner store where maybe there's not a lot of opportunities for fresh food or other things for your family. But when you have that gas, you can get where you need to go. Like you have that choice. And I think that's a huge part of the equity conversation, right? Is like, are we giving the same choices to all families? Like what choices do I have that other people are not going to have? Whether that's being able to choose fresh food or choose where my kids go to school or choose what kind of job I want to have or something like that. And I think that's what we saw again and again was families being able to make those choices to really be able to come through this year feeling a lot better and really being able to survive this pandemic in a way that so many other families in their situation were not able to.
Thank you for that. And I want to go back to that just a little bit in a few. But Brandon, I really want you to weigh in a little bit because Sarah's talking about, again, providing support for families in a way that allows them to have access to take care of their basic needs in a situation where it previously may have been a privilege for them to be able to do that, but now because of access, then they're able to address it as a very basic need. And so when we think about that in the context of safety nets, I'd like to hear your perspective on what the societal costs are of a larger social safety net and how do you justify the financial costs associated with a social safety net?
Yeah, well, Sarah, I just want to thank you for the work you do in that program. That's tremendous. And hearing about it, I can imagine how many lives were impacted during, what has to be one of the most difficult periods of time we've experienced as people. So that's encouraging to hear about that work going on in Mississippi. And Temika, I think one of the things I have been thinking about over the course of this pandemic and in the context of this word social safety net is kind of taking away this us against them dichotomy, this sort of, what will we give people out of our largesse? Because it's really not a very helpful framework, I think, for this conversation. So when we talk about the cost, I mean, what I would say is the bill comes due, whether you have a robust social safety net or a walk it off program like what we have here in Mississippi. Governments have to spend money when people slip through the cracks. So to me, it's really not a question of whether you spend, it's a question of whether you're going to go into this stuff with a plan that's designed to work, or if you're just going to kind of make it up as you go along. And I think the smartest play is building up a solid social safety net. Now, it's probably worth noting, I'm not an economist, but I think what we can see when you just look at the data is that when we invest in each other and when we invest in programs that try to prevent people from having these huge changes in their economic situation, it's better for all of us. So, I think every government in the world has to wrestle with how it allocates resources and what basic services it provides to people. And I think here in Mississippi, we've really struggled to try to develop a system that's maybe more aspirational than one that's in conversation with what is actually happening here in Mississippi in people's lives. I'm sure you heard last week, Temika, during the health conversation, that we have more than 200,000 Mississippians who earn too much to qualify for Medicaid, and yet they have too little to pay for private insurance. And so these people, since they can't afford preventative care, or they don't have a regular family doctor in their lives, they end up having to use our hospitals as their doctor's offices. And of course, our hospitals don't turn these people away. They provide care. They try to get them patched up or fixed up, or look at the situation. And that uncompensated care, as they call it, is passed along to the folks who come to the hospital next and who pay, or to the insurance company who has a contract with the hospital. And so the question isn't really whether we pay for that. Like, here in Mississippi, we've chosen not to expand Medicaid. Well, that doesn't mean we're not paying. It doesn't mean we're not paying for healthcare. It doesn't mean we're not paying for triage. It doesn't mean that we're not paying for these highest in the nation heart disease and diabetes incidents. We are paying for that. We're just paying for it in a really inefficient way on the back end, and in a way that, has worse outcomes than it would if we would just pay for it smarter and on the front end. I know tonight we'll talk a little bit about unemployment. I think it's worth flagging that as of March of this year, we had somewhere near 500,000 Mississippians that had received some form of unemployment benefit. And when you compare that to the overall civilian workforce in Mississippi, which is about 1.3 million, that means that we have about 1/3 of Mississippi workers that have received some amount of unemployment during the course of this pandemic. Now, here in Mississippi, we have chosen to do unemployment on the cheap. We have always been at the bottom. We are 51st in terms of the amount that we pay, $235 a week, 51st because we even come in behind the District of Columbia. And what that has meant for us, as compared to states that have more robust social safety net and better unemployment, is that downturns in the economy, like the Great Recession or this pandemic, we have a more severe labor market decline, and we have a slower economic rebound. And so, there again, we might think of ourselves as saving money because we're doing unemployment on the cheap and we have the lowest unemployment benefit. But if that all results in you creating a deeper hole for your state, and it means a longer recession than other states experience, we're actually paying more in the long run for being cheap on the front end. And so this notion of, we're going to save the money by not investing in the social safety net, it comes back around. And on a national level, I was very interested to hear from our other panelists tonight, because, we've seen both in Europe and in the United States, kind of this backing off of the social safety net. We've never quite had a European model in the United States, but back in the 20s and 50s, we had something that was certainly more robust than what we have now. And as we have scaled that back over the last 50 years, what we've essentially accomplished is a wider income gap and a wider debt gap. I mean, the folks at the top are getting, further on up the top, and the folks at the bottom are kind of at the bottom. I said a minute ago, it's an investment in each other. I think it's really an investment in reality too. There's a pretty decent book that I'll be honest, I don't understand all of it, but it's intended for people like me to be able to understand it. It's good economics for hard times by a couple Nobel Prize winners, Doctors Banerjee and Duflo, and they talk about this concept of the American dream. And I can't say it as well as they do, but just to try to paraphrase it, I think it just really hit me when we talk about these issues in Mississippi. This American dream concept, that if you work hard enough and long enough, you'll succeed, it has really done a number on us. I mean, it's done a number on all Americans, but it's really done a number on us here in Mississippi. Because here in Mississippi, we tend to vote and to approach poverty as if we're all in the country club. Or if we're not in the country club yet, we're about to be. And that's just not the reality. I mean, most of our wages and income have stagnated in this state. And that goes for folks who even are comparatively rich. There has not been a whole lot of moving up from the middle class into the upper middle class. There's been almost a decimation of what we used to think of as these various middle class distinctions. Most of us are not going to move up to a higher economic class during our lifetime. And that goes for some of us that are carrying a few degrees behind our name. And so we're really not being that honest with ourselves. And I think when we try to reconcile the hard reality about where we are in Mississippi, where we are poor, and in many communities, we are just various gradations of poor. When we try to confront that, we're confronted with sort of a reality that's almost too much to bear. This American dream that we've been telling ourselves for so long, and that informs so much of our political choices and our policy choices, it becomes hard for us to reconcile that reality that we're seeing. And so we're left to either blame ourselves or blame somebody else for taking away that opportunity. And then I think that's when despair and anger enter the picture. And I say that, and I don't know if I intended to arrive at this point, Temika, but we have a lot of political violence in our country right now. And we have a lot of anger and a lot of us against them in the way that we look at how economic works and how our money works. And why did I get passed over for the job? Why didn't I get this? And, blaming the other, and the kind of xenophobia that's crept into how we look at, the immigrant community in this country. And it's become this kind of force that empowers and enforces so much of how we view the world and how we interact politically with one another. And so this is serious business. And I think Mississippi politicians do our state a great disservice when they make it an us against them enterprise, when they pit restaurant owners or franchise owners against employees, when they convince people that they would have it all if only they could get rid of these political fictions, these enemies. So I think this economic discussion bleeds over into a lot of things that we've witnessed in society at large and in our state over the past few years.
Thank you for that, Brandon. And as you described that, right, the sobering of the state in terms of understanding where it is, do you feel like at what point should there be a disruption in the madness, right? Like where, and then, or better yet, when we think about the economic health of the state of Mississippi, do you feel that the economic health of the state is reflective of the cultural attitudes that we have for one another across the state, and how that economic will is just kind of a mirror to our hearts and minds as it relates to community? Would you argue that or no?
Yeah. I mean, I think it would be, Temika, if you tried to describe, if you just presented someone who knew nothing about Mississippi with the statistics on Mississippi, you showed them how much we make on average and what median income is, and how much debt people carry, and how many of us have jobs that kind of come and go at different points. And then you compared that picture of who we really are, 50th and 51st in so many essential categories, to our politics and our policy choices. I think people would go, wow, y'all really have an elevated sense of yourself. Like you're really, I've got a 6-year-old who really thinks that he is the most incredible athlete in the country right now, and that he is the most incredible artist in the country right now. Now, look, I'm not going to disabuse him of that at this early age. That's fine. He'll figure out the same way I did that we're not as tall and fast as we think we are. But it's sort of like we're a state that has gone on decade after decade with this sort of infantile view of ourselves. It's just not in touch with reality. So you ask, how are we doing? Well, let's just read the newspaper. People who own businesses say they can't get people to work, so they're asking the government to make these people come to work. Supposedly, the people who would have these jobs don't think they're getting proper benefits. They don't think the pay is right. They don't think that the conditions are safe. They don't think that childcare is in order. They don't think that it's a good deal for them. And so if you have the people who hire the people on the front page of the paper, begging the governor and the speaker to do something to force people into their workplace, which, by the way, is not a very good business model. Just let's say that. But then on the other hand, you've got people who, are saying this job situation is just not doing it. We're still stuck at a $7.25 minimum wage. These places are not safe. I have to have a place to keep my children. I would say that's a pretty fair pick. So the people at, in this sort of us against them situation that we've sort of constructed for ourselves, us and them are mad and displeased with the situation. So it's apparently not working for anybody. And if you look at our numbers, it's just astonishing the amount of money that we've left on the table. There's federal dollars that are donated to things like TANF. There are federal dollars that have been donated, dedicated, not donated, dedicated to things like Medicaid expansion. And every state that fits our profile with a lick of sense has taken full advantage of these programs because they recognize those dollars come back into the community. They turn over and over again in the economy of these states. And somehow we have not gotten that. These employers that are begging for some strange one-off cut benefits, cut unemployment, they don't seem to appreciate that if we expanded Medicaid, if we raised minimum wage, if we allowed Mississippi to get the full share of its benefits that other states get, that would mean such a cleaner and more robust economic picture for them and people who are doing everything across the state. But again, we try to do it on the cheap. And I think one of your questions was, is that reflective of kind of our values? I think it says something very bad about our values. I think all of that makes a concoction that does not say very nice things about us. And I think here in Mississippi and in the South, we like to think of ourselves as being hospitable. We like to think of ourselves primarily as being Christians, although I know that's not true for all of us, but we're here in the buckle of the Bible Belt. We have these ways of thinking of ourselves. And I think if you aspire to be Christ-like, that doesn't really live up to that idea of how we treat our economy. Or if you just aspire to be a hospitable, good neighbor, I don't think that economic picture that I just played out, which is, I think not overly biased, is kind of ripped from the headlines. It doesn't really paint a very nice picture of who we are.
And what you're sharing, Brandon, intersects perfectly with what Sarah shared earlier. You're talking about kind of the disconnect between the business districts or the attitudes of business folks and folks who are doing the work on the ground. And especially when we think about the working poor and how, you pour into a full day of work and sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, and you're constantly working, and still basic things like healthcare, a trip to the doctor, putting gas in your car is a privilege for you unless there are programs out there to kind of catch the leaks in your budgeting. And so that is, I think, really important to point out when we think about how all of these things intersects together. And it's really interesting also, how that still deviates widely from other points of view about this whole ideology that we're discussing, right? But Sarah, I want to go back to you for a minute to discuss some of the UBIs. The push for UBI in the US has traditionally been a fringe issue. And actually respond, I do want you to just talk a little bit about what I mean when I talk about UBI, right? But millions of Americans recently became beneficiaries of guaranteed income through congressional COVID support packages. How has that changed perceptions of initiatives like Magnolia Mothers Trust or the broader argument for increased direct financial support?
Yeah, this question is amazing in so many ways, like how these things have changed over these last few months. So to talk a little bit more about UBI, UBI is this idea of universal basic income, which would be giving everyone direct payments of a certain amount, right? So most people are kind of associating that with Andrew Yang and his campaign for president, and kind of what he was pushing out with his freedom dividend. We do in our program try to separate ourselves from the conversation of UBI and call our program guaranteed income, which is really intentional for us because we do, in our opinion, like these payments should be targeted and they should be specific, and they shouldn't be eliminating the entire social safety net, which a lot of UBI programs do advocate for, right? So it's kind of like get rid of SNAP, get rid of TANF, get rid of everything else, and just have these direct payments. Whereas we're always going to be talking about like cash plus, right? Like how does cash fit into this larger conversation of a robust and broad social safety net, and what does that look like? So yeah, so since COVID hit, really, the idea of cash has just become so normalized so fast in a way that none of us expected. This program for us had always been about influencing particularly federal policy and having these conversations about what this looks like. So a lot of this work for us came out of conversations around TANF, which is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. For those people who don't know, TANF is cash welfare, so it is in some ways direct assistance a lot of times, but states are given a lot of leeway in deciding how they spend TANF funds. Mississippi spends very, 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 very little of its TANF funds on direct payments to families. Currently, based on the last MDHS report, there are 270 adults in the state of Mississippi receiving TANF, which is just like an insanely low number. And you know, TANF, even in Mississippi, it's so stigmatized, but outside of Mississippi too, it's very stigmatized, right? Like there are very few states with like super robust TANF programs, and people have always been very wary around like these programs where you give folks cash instead of vouchers. But I think as we've seen, right, like what happened in COVID is it just kind of like blew up so many of these systems that we had come to understand and had normalized in so many ways. And people saw things that they had never seen before and experienced them in their own lives, right? Like saw all these cracks in the system. So, you know, people started recognizing for the first time, like, oh, what does it mean to try to work when I have no feasible childcare option, right? Like, what does it mean when a voucher doesn't cover the things that I need for kids' schools, when it doesn't cover diapers, when it doesn't cover like these very basic necessities or the gas in my car or, you know, PPE or whatever it is, right? Like what happens when I don't have that flexibility? And so, you know, when we started getting these direct cash payments, I think people got really excited about that, right? And seeing what would happen when that happened, it just became very normalized to have that. And so not only did that happen on a federal level, but so many other programs around guaranteed income really started cropping up all around the country. And a lot of them were coming to us, right? Because we were really one of the first ones to get started and having a lot of these questions around like, what does it look like to set up this program and what does it mean? And kind of having that normalized conversation. So, you know, to see the CTC, the child tax credit, like be in the American Rescue Plan now, and it's going to start happening in July, you know, like that is insanely encouraging to us. Like that's honestly like something we thought was going to happen maybe 10 years down the road. And for that to be coming now is really incredible. And I had a conversation with, I was out with some other folks doing guaranteed income like right before the pandemic started too. And we were having this conversation about what does it look like for this to become policy? And all of us were kind of saying, you know, like it's going to have to be something like Social Security, right? Where it becomes this very normalized piece of our existence. And it gets to a point where you're like, oh, you can't take that away from people anymore because people are so used to it. And that's what I find really encouraging about the CTC, right, is like a huge majority of Americans are going to start getting these cash payments, and there's not going to be a politician who's willing to take that away from them, right? You know, this is really an opportunity that we have to make this a part of our social safety net, and to talk about cash and the power of cash and what direct payments can do in a way that hasn't been possible for years, and especially since welfare reform and a lot of the restrictions around TANF really increased with work requirements and things like that. So we're really excited to see what might happen through all of that.
Well, I want to throw in a question that we have from the audience briefly around Magnolia Mothers Trust. And the question is, initiatives like Magnolia Mothers Trust are done through non-governmental methods. Is this better than going through the government? How can private methods work better than government-led initiatives?
Yeah. So, ultimately, like, we only have what we have, right? It costs us, honestly, like millions of dollars to run this program each year for 100 families, right? And when you're talking about like that kind of amount of money, like how many, small nonprofits or other organizations are really equipped to do that kind of work? Like, they aren't, like, we aren't, and our goal has never been to be like, Springboard to Opportunities wants to provide $1,000 a month to every, mom in federal subsidized housing across the country. Like, our goal has always been to ask to influence policy in this way, right? Because like, I don't know, like, what is the government's job if the government's job is not to take care of its people? I think for us, we really think there's some benefits for us to be piloting this program as a nonprofit. Like, we have a lot of leeway to be able to do some things that we want to do that's not tied to politics or to politicians needing to be in office or people getting voted off or like the whims of public opinion, which can shift very quickly. So I think that's part of the reason why we've been able to have a longstanding program and why we've been able to start producing really robust evaluations. And it's really our hope that as a private entity, like, we'll be able to produce the data that really shows how valuable these programs can be and really elevates the stories of our families in a way that can influence community and policy makers across the country. With the hopes that it can eventually be a government program, Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's just impossible to say that a private entity could run a really large scale program at the level that I think is really needed for this country. And so I think ultimately that's where it has to go. And that's kind of where it has to get cemented into the normalization of American policy.
Thank you for that. And I really wanted to, I'm really glad you went into that piece a little bit, because again, we talked about this being the first of a two-part series. And so without our full panel, I think this gives really great opportunity, in a later conversation to come back and discover and discuss some of the alternatives or alternate points of view on some of these issues that we're talking about. So, just to be transparent again with our audience, we certainly are sensitive to making sure that we have, different perspectives at the table on a topic like this. And, due to circumstances beyond our control, we don't have all of our voices at the table tonight. But in our follow-up conversation, our audience, they've got to join us, because we're going to continue again with some of these issues. I want to switch just a little bit back to you, Brandon, and talk a little bit about earlier this week when Governor Reeves announced that Mississippi would soon opt out of additional federal unemployment benefits. And you kind of got into this a bit. And opting out amid reports of widespread job vacancies in various sectors. So the question is, has the increase in government unemployment support since the beginning of COVID disincentivized people from working and increased reliance on government support?
Well, I think the question that was directed at Sarah a moment ago and this one are connected in some ways, because I think that we've been sold on this notion that, and this is kind of a prevailing political norm in the South of the United States, that our government is too big and it needs to be made smaller. And we say that in spite of the fact that, again, our prevailing politics tend to be Republican here, in spite of the fact that the national debt has reached heights before unseen under our last two Republican presidents. And so we are spending money as a government. Sarah mentioned this a moment ago. We're doing things as a government. We might as well be good at it. At some point, we started to talk about the government in this very antagonistic way, instead of thinking about it as something that should be run as efficiently as we would expect anything else to be run. and to be good stewards of resources and to be thoughtful in how it spends them. And so I don't know, Temika, how we reprogram ourselves to think differently about what government actually is. But this notion of being an enemy of government is silliness. It is pure silliness, and it puts us on a collision course with our own best interest. And so this idea that we need to think about how to shrink it and somehow put folks in to run it that aren't any good at it, or that seem to be at best kind of ambiguous about it. It's a bad way to run any business, and it's sure a bad way to run a government that so many people depend on. But you asked a key question that I think we're talking about, which is, has it disincentivized people from working? This idea of unemployment benefits. And the fact is, and this is one of those unassailable facts of the pandemic, it has not disincentivized work. And we should be very forceful in making sure that we don't let people get away with that argument. The US labor market did not see big increases in employment after the $600 unemployment benefit expired last year. Now, that's a hard piece of data, and that was twice what the current benefit is. So think about that for a minute. That's the heart of the pandemic. That's twice the amount that we're discussing now. And the US Department of Labor reports, which I don't think anyone is arguing about the efficacy of those reports, they did not see a big increase in employment once that money went away. So the notion that we withdraw this benefit and then suddenly people rush into these jobs and into these particular sectors that are having trouble is just not the case. And I think it's important to note that in this most recent jobs report, the sectors that saw the largest employment increases were low-wage sectors. And so just think about that for a minute. That means that the workers who would get the largest boost from unemployment benefits as a share of their wages, those are the people who are going back to work. And so those are not arguments or manipulations. Those are just what the reports show. What this would do and what it's going to do next month, cutting these unemployment benefits, is going to hurt workers who are depending on benefits while they can't find work or are unable to work. And it's going to be a drag on the economy because these benefits, like we talked about a moment ago, they support spending. They are turned over into this. I don't know what we think folks are spending this money on, but they're spending it within their community to buy things from the folks who are complaining that, that they're having some type of worker shortage. So I think there's kind of a circular piece to this that's a little bit maddening. And I think it's worth kind of pointing out just a few things about this particular moment in history. There's a lot of reports out there that people are continuing to have caregiving responsibilities that are impinging on the labor supply, that people are taking care of people. There's a good segment of our population that cannot be vaccinated right now. There are mothers who are tending to children, and there are a lot of moms who have just done the basic math in their head and said, I don't care if it's a remote possibility, I'm still going to be careful with my family because I have a person that is in my family that might be, subject to getting ill. And so they're making a decision to be a caregiver. There are also people who are elderly that need care given to them, and the conditions of the pandemic have just complicated that whole arrangement and what the logistics of that look like. And so a big piece of the labor conversation right now is that women are who are in many of our families and in many of our communities, the primary helper and caregiver, are giving care at home. And that has caused a bit of a labor supply bottleneck. Now think about cutting off unemployment benefits to those folks that are in the caregiving mode of this pandemic. And the notion that you're going to cut benefits to somehow drive them into the economy, that's foolishness. And there's a certain cruelty to that too. But then we've also seen that how people are returning to work, there's kind of a correlation between that and how people are handling the vaccine. And so there's a correlation to vaccination. So we have I think a pretty good state health officer, Dr. Thomas Dobbs, who's, been sending out regular press conferences, and he's been active on social media and been putting messages out there. He said last week, about the time that we were talking about cutting unemployment, that COVID is not gone. You will likely either get COVID or you will get a COVID vaccine. And unfortunately, Temika, a lot of Mississippians appear to be opting for COVID if given a choice. I mean, we are still seeing hundreds of diagnoses a day. And as of Friday, we were ranked at the bottom again in terms of vaccination rate, because we only have about 25.51% of our people that are fully vaccinated who can be. So we're about 60% off from this idea of herd immunity. And so you think about all that. I mean, that all fits into this conversation about returning to work and what does it look like. And it seems to me that some of the same people that are complaining the loudest about returning to work and people, this kind of fiction of people living high on the hog because of unemployment benefits are the same ones that are not creating a safe workspace and are the same ones that are, trashing folks for wearing masks. I mean, even though we know the CDC guidance on that stuff has changed, but it's a safety issue. I want to work, I want to pay my bills, but I'd like to live to see whatever comes next in my life. And so I think we're not being very thoughtful about the whole person in some of this. And that certainly, for me, factors into how we should think about this current moment and what unemployment looks like.
Thank you. You've given a lot for part two to react to. And so I think that's going to make for some really exciting furthering of this conversation. And I know we're getting short on time. We've got about 10 more minutes. And so I kind of want to go back again to how we started the conversation, right? Taking a look at, and it's really just kind of a differing in ideologies about, what support and success and privilege and opportunity looks like and who deserves that. And what's the role of the government in that whole piece. And so I just want to throw out this last question for both of you to react to, and I'll start with you, Sarah. And that is living out of poverty a right or a privilege?
I mean, it is a right. And I don't know, I don't even know how to have a conversation, I think, with someone who can't see that. Life is not a game of Monopoly where we all start at the same square with $200 and, try to build up some real estate. Some people are born on Park Place, right, with 5 hotels already there, and other people are just trying to figure out if they can get in the game or not. To say that we are all in the same space and start in the same place and get to work ourselves out of whatever it is and work our way to this privileged position, I think is a farce. And I think we've seen that in this last year, but I think we've seen that even before this. I don't know how we can live in a state like Mississippi and know our history and think that that is something where we're all starting on equal playing ground and that we all have the ability and the same advantages as everyone else. It's just not true. And to say that anyone deserves to live in poverty is just, I don't know, that is just so beyond me. I almost have a hard time responding to it. I have a deep belief in the dignity of every single human being and that every single human being has the right to flourish and deserves to have the opportunity to flourish. And it's our role as a community and as other people to help people get there. And I think it's our job as a society to put the things in place that need to happen to make sure that we can get there. Like Brandon has said so many times, I don't think our government has tried in Mississippi very often to do something different, right? We haven't tried to give people benefits. We haven't tried to make a more robust social safety net. So to make an argument that, that those things don't work I'd love to see us try just one time, right? Like, let's spend 1 year giving everyone like the benefits that they need and a really robust social safety system. And like, let's see what happens, as opposed to continuing to sit in the same again and again and again in these cycles where we're just letting people kind of wallow it and not be able to have the basic necessities that they need. Not even just to flourish, but just to survive. So yeah, living out of poverty is absolutely a right and something that should be given to every single human. And I think it's all of our responsibility to make sure that happens.
Brandon?
Yeah, that's such a good note to end on. We should just go ahead and pass the offering plate now, Temika, and close it out. But I mean, Sarah is so right. I was thinking as she was talking, what would it look like just to try? What would it look like just to lean in, make a good effort, live up to the promises that we've made to ourselves and to other people for just a period of time? Because she is so correct, and we just have not seen that. And we should demand it. I mean, it really tells you all you need to know about us, that the folks who want to hire people at $7.25 an hour are leading the charge in the debate right now. And yet the folks who are saying $7.25 an hour is not enough are sort of relegated to the outskirts of this conversation. That just tells you how upside down we have created this dialogue. We fail to see each other as part of a community and the humanity in each other at our own peril. I mean, there is an economic reality to this. I mean, I know that it sounds, people who might disagree and who don't like the touchy-feely stuff might say, I can do it. I can pull myself up by my bootstraps. I've got this. I can work hard enough to do it. But what we have seen, and what Sarah and I have tried to talk about tonight, is the numbers just don't play that out. Like, you can ignore these problems as long as you want, but they don't go away, and you end up paying for them. Even in a state like Mississippi, where we like to say we're not going to do the social safety net, we do. We just do it in the back end. It's very inelegant, it's very messy, and it's very expensive. And people die because of it. And look, when you don't see people as connected, when you don't see the members of your own community as being part and parcel of who you are, and an extension of you, and you don't see yourself in your community, you make bad decisions, and it has a corrosive effect on you as a person. So, I would encourage our listeners and people thinking about Mississippi to, maybe it's not appropriate to say, let's see the government do something first. Maybe it's better for us to start demanding of ourselves and of our own communities a little bit more of a holistic approach, where we don't try to pretend that it's the haves versus the have-nots or us versus them. We begin to see ourselves as Mississippians, as pulling for each other. And then maybe we can graduate to demanding that of our leadership and demanding that of the people who are making decisions. Because look, if they don't see it in us and we reward them for bad decisions, we're going to continue to get the same thing. So maybe it starts with us talking about these things differently and not parroting back the bad ideas we're hearing from the top.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a perfect way to wrap things up, just focusing on personal empowerment. Because a lot of times when we talk about these types of issues, it can seem so big and the topics can be so polarizing. But when we think about what can we do as an individual to create equity, or what can we do as an individual to make sure that the dream that America has continued to fill itself with about being a land of opportunity, that's true for everyone. And so I think it's just important for everybody to think about, what can I do very specifically? What can I do, and how can I be a change agent within the context of what's immediately around me? And then, like you said, moving on to, other layers of the community, be they government, be they, community organizations, be they houses of worship, be they institutions, whatever that is. Then we're talking about moving into intersecting systems. But first, we've got to start with self. So thank you to both of you for an awesome, awesome discussion. I cannot wait to see what the second half of this talk is going to look like. I think we've been able to kick off some really important ideas and take a look at some of the exemplary work that's happening within your organizations and that's driving some of the change that Mississippi needs so much. And so with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Caroline, who's our guardian angel tonight, and she's going to take us out.
Jumping back on the screen. Thank you to Brandon and Sarah and Temika for participating tonight. We really appreciate it. Like I said earlier, if you don't already follow us on Facebook, please like our page and you can stay up to date on future Ideas on Tap programs and other things that the Humanities Council has going on. We look forward to seeing y'all for future Ideas on Tap programs. And thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday night. We look forward to seeing y'all again. Thanks, everybody.